I actually made it. Give me just a second here. We are out in the sun, shade, garden. I am thoroughly enjoying this. Hey, everybody. I am Mary from Mary's Heirloom Seeds, and welcome to my weekly live chat. Let me just kind of scroll up here and make sure I see everybody, make sure I see your comments, make sure my camera's not wonky today. Alrighty, everybody. I am Mary, and I try to go live here every Thursday at 5 p.m. Central Time. Hey there, Green Thumb Gardener. Enjoy the video, hopefully. Krista says, even though I don't really grow much squash, I'm here for the informational purposes. Awesome. Hey, Serena, thanks for joining us. So tonight's topic is specifically squash for long-term storage. And I'm going to talk about the different varieties. I'm going to talk about some of the storage things that we talk about. Hey, Christine, thanks for joining us, and Kate as well. So, before I get started, hey, Kathleen, hey, Pamela, in the description section of this video, you will find everything I'm discussing and so much more. My comprehensive planting guide. I want to share this with you before I do my video. I'm sorry about the shade, the light, whatever. The lighting isn't great because I'm outside and it's beautiful outside, so I couldn't really resist. And thank you very much. There is a link to purchase the Mostly Feral Gardener shirt for Mary's Heirloom Seeds. We also have a couple announcements that I will share closer to the end of the video, so please stay tuned and keep watching. So I recently had, hey Steady13, I recently had a comment in the Mostly Feral Gardeners group. If you don't know, I created a Facebook page. It's like a friends of group that people can share all their awesome Mary's Heirloom Seeds posts. Hey, David. So recently, a newer customer said she had delayed in actually looking at my comprehensive planting guide. She knew that I mentioned it in all my videos, and holy cow, was she excited about the information that was available to her. She actually printed out some of the planting guides. Krista, yes. So I posted on my Facebook page and I posted it on my YouTube channel, but if you haven't already, again, in the description section of this video, you will find a brand new shirt. You will find it in the regular, and you will find a very small amount of the V-necks, but I'll get to that in just a second. So she was excited about all of the information that was available in my comprehensive planting guide, and she literally said everything she had questions about she found on my comprehensive planting guide. So super awesome and exciting. I'm really glad. Hey Jenny, thanks for joining us. I'm glad that people are seeing the comprehensive planting guide, even though I repeat myself all the time. But it's important. So tonight, the meat and potatoes of the video is growing squash for long-term storage, but I also want to share a couple of updates and announcements, but those are going to be at the end of the video, so please watch. Hit the thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you can. We just hit 13,000 subscribers, which is kind of exciting, right? So my best storage squash so far has been Seminole Pumpkin. If you have struggled with squash vine borers, with squash bugs, I highly recommend 2 specific varieties on my website, and I grow them myself. I have personal experience in growing them in literally 3 different states, and they are phenomenal. And those 2, are you ready? Drum roll. Those 2 are Seminole Pumpkin and Tromboncino Squash. And if you don't know, a pumpkin is a winter squash, but not all winter squash are pumpkins. So hopefully you'll learn something new today. Now, my Seminole Pumpkin, I did an experiment. I planted seeds in 2021, and I harvested in 2021, and I was able to store those Seminole pumpkins until the following year in November of 2022. That's 13 months. And they smelled the same, they tasted the same, and they felt the same as I had harvested them a week prior. So that's pretty awesome. That was an experiment in long-term storage. And I have to tell you, with the current state of food prices and just all of the things that are going on right now, it's a good idea to consider long-term storage. I actually created a long-term storage. I should say, it's never ending because I will eventually add more stuff to it. So Jennifer, if you'll give me 1 second, I'm going to finish this and I will definitely answer your question. So I started this food storage prepping in the garden series, and you can find it on my YouTube channel that isn't a live video. I just did a couple blips, super simple and short videos about specific varieties that you can grow for food storage. Pumpkin was one of them. Now, in the pumpkin video, I also explained, Krista, you're getting ahead of me, but yes, I will. In my pumpkin video, I explained curing the pumpkins. And that is the same for a winter squash. So I also linked in the description section of this video, I also linked my video. It's food storage, prepping in the garden, pumpkins. And I explained how to cure and also store your pumpkins. So that is an important part of storing long term. Now, it's important to keep them off the ground, keep them off of, say, concrete. You can use cardboard. That's a good one. And you'll find more information, again, in the video, but I am going to share a little bit about that first. Before I do that, I want to answer the question about summer squash versus winter squash. Now, summer squash generally has a softer outer skin that is edible. It is a summer squash because it is generally harvested in the summer and it doesn't store very well. So there's a couple weeks, maybe a month or two. Some squash can store better in the refrigerator or just on a kitchen counter, but not for very long. Think of summer squash as zucchini. I don't know about you, but every now and then you have that random something you find in the back of your refrigerator, and sometimes it's a fuzzy zucchini. And so that is one of the things that you'll notice that summer squash doesn't store as well. Winter squash is called winter squash because generally you can harvest your winter squash. It takes longer to harvest than, say, a zucchini. You're looking at 90 to 110 days, but it can be stored into winter time. Hey, Moonblade, thanks for joining me. So the average storage time, I'm getting ahead of myself, but I'm just going to throw it out there. Butternut squash is one of the more longer storing winter squash. It has I got one right here. So this is a butternut squash. So it has a very hard shell. If I push my fingernail into it, you would notice it, but it wouldn't damage it as fast as, say, a zucchini. And this butternut squash can be stored for 6 months or more. So the curing process is when you harvest this zucchini. I've talked about zucchini earlier, and now I'm on butternut squash. So when you are storing butternut squash, you want to remove any of the debris on the outside. You want to make sure that there's no blemishes. So if there's a hole in this, you don't want to store it long term, because if you store that long term, it will potentially rot faster. And if you have a rotting squash with the rest of your storage, you are potentially spreading some of that rot to your others. So if you see something that has a hole punched in it, a bug punched in it, or even your fingernail, you want to make sure that you eat this faster. But on average, a butternut squash can be stored for 6 months or more. So you can grow these in the summertime, harvest them in the fall, and store them in your cold storage for 6 months or even more. Some of my customers, when I asked on Facebook, said that they were storing things for 6 months to 14 months. So again, it really is going to depend on your area. I love the sun and I love that it's warm out right now, but it's right in my face. Let me kind of scoot a little bit over here and see if I can get it so that I'm not in the sun. Not really gonna work. Let's see. Butternut squash. If you use food grade wax to put on the top where there's a cut, will that make it last longer? I do not know. That's a great question. I have not used that, so I can't really say for certain that that's gonna work. I'm sorry I'm moving around so much. The sun is starting to go down, so it's beautiful. I just want to take a moment. I know that a lot of times people get upset because it's so hot, but it was cold in some places, and I'm just thoroughly enjoying sitting out here in the sun. It's baking my face. But at least I put sunscreen on first. And the lighting is terrible for this video, but that's okay. I'm just thoroughly enjoying the fact that it's spring and it's starting to warm up. So anyway, totally got sidetracked there. So curing is an important part of the process. I would not necessarily, I don't know actually if using certain waxes would help. You don't really want to store them for more than a year because they're going to get a little funky after a while anyway. So just keep that in mind when you are looking at storing and whatnot. Another one is going to be Butternut Squash. So these are, sorry, I can't see though. I can't see your questions. All right. When one apple rots, the whole bag will rot. Same goes for pumpkins and squash. Exactly. So you get the idea. You get what I'm saying. I'm going to kind of scoot back and see if I can kind of... So if you are storing your squash, you want to make sure you have a good designated spot so that you don't have rotting food with the rest of your good food. So Christine made a really good point. You really don't want to have any kind of rotting food in your area. Okay, so here's the thing about storing squash. From what I read, it needs to be at 50 to 55 degrees with a relative humidity of 60 to 70%. Not everybody can do that, but I store in my laundry room, so it's an air-conditioned portion of my house. So we don't keep our house super hot and we don't keep our house super cold. So that for me has been the best storage area. Some of you may have a better option than I do, but just, you know, it's there. If you have something that works for you and that's always worked for you, don't worry about all the extra stuff that I have. Now, I mentioned butternut squash. I mentioned Seminole pumpkin. I mentioned tromboncino squash. So there's a couple of varieties that also do well. I mentioned kombucha earlier, and that stores for about 6 months as well. The curing time for these is anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 months. And it really just depends on your area and what you're doing in that area. I'm going to see if I can... Do you mind if I just kind of swing you guys around here so you can maybe see a little bit of different of my garden, but maybe I can actually see you? All right, how about that? Now I can actually see you. All right, so there's a couple of different varieties that you can also add. Delicata squash. I have one right here. Spaghetti squash. Does anybody like spaghetti squash? I love spaghetti squash. Do you know why it's called spaghetti squash? If you've ever cooked one of these spaghetti squash varieties, so here's what I do for spaghetti squash. I cut it in half and I bake it with the round side up, so the skin side up. And then when you're done baking it, you flip it over. I always add water to my baking pan because it does need a little bit of water so it doesn't get kind of funky. And then once you flip it over, you can take a fork and literally just scrape the insides of it, and it's like spaghetti. Now, keep in mind that anytime you use a vegetable substitute, it's not going to be the same as spaghetti. So don't go into this expecting it to be just like your grandmother's spaghetti. It's not. That's not really how it works. All right, so let me read some of these because I missed some of them. I have 4 foot of snow. Oh my goodness, I'm really sorry about that. Let's see, garage in upstate New York. Delicata squash on the counter for a few weeks and cut it to find sprouted seeds. Awesome. So Green Thumb Gardens, did you purchase that delicata squash or did you grow it in your garden? Because that's going to make a difference. If you purchase the delicata squash, it may have been older than you thought when you actually purchased it. If you grew it in your garden, that's pretty cool that it already sprouted because that's free seeds. Spaghetti squash seems bland to me and a good recipe. Okay, so spaghetti squash is totally bland. Sorry, I love spaghetti squash, but it is bland compared to other squash, but it's like spaghetti. So my recommendation, if you're going to use spaghetti squash, give it a pizzazz. Use pesto. Use something flashy in your sauce, and it is fan-freaking-tastic. So Green Thumb Gardening, you said you purchased it, so that is a great point. Because these winter squash can store for so long, sometimes when you buy them in the store or at the farmer's market, they might be older than you expect. So good point there. I'm glad you mentioned that. So another one of my absolute favorites, Acorn Squash. Hey, Keith Scott, thanks for joining us. Acorn Squash is another awesome favorite. Let's see. Hello from snowy, Massachusetts. It is cold there, isn't it? Worst case, butter and salt with pepper fixes almost all food issues. Very true. Acorn is one of my favorites. I adore acorn squash. I can salt it. So you can do a savory, you can do a sweet. And again, for those of you just joining me, I apologize for the lighting. I'm out thoroughly enjoying the sun. I'm just soaking up as much of this delicious sunny rays as possible because it's gone from 80 degrees to 40 degrees and everywhere in between. So as much as I can get this beautiful sun, I'm going to enjoy it. So someone said, love acorn squash. What's the shelf life? Excellent question. So the shelf life on acorn squash is anywhere from 3 to 6 months, generally, depending on what your conditions are. So if it's better conditions, it's going to be longer. If it's not so optimal conditions, it might be less. If you're just joining me, thank you so much. If you're brand new to my channel, welcome. For those of you just joining me, welcome back. Please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. My favorite recipe for this is stuffed. I will cut it in half and I will bake it upright with a little bit of butter. And then I will add my stuffing. So I've actually done this 2 ways, which is nice because there's 2 people in my household. One of us likes sweet and one of us likes savory. So for the sweet, I use brown sugar or local raw honey with cinnamon and cayenne. Cayenne, you wouldn't think so, but a little bit of spice adds something to it when you're using a sweet. And then for my savory, I usually do salt, pepper, and garlic. And a little bit of butter goes a long way for these. It really just makes the squash. And then you bake it. I have a recipe on my website also for stuffed acorn squash. So in the description section of this video, you'll find a link to my comprehensive planting guide. In the comprehensive planting guide is also recipes. You'll find my stuffed acorn squash right there. Super easy to use. Now, you've been waiting for a little bit of announcement, and I will share that with you without further ado. There are several. First and foremost is the Mostly Feral Gardener shirts are now available at marysheirloomseeds.com. They were a pre-order and they are now here. So what is left from our pre-orders is now available to purchase and will ship quickly. In the description section of this video, you'll find a link. I also just added V-necks. There was an overwhelming request for V-necks. So we've added those for the ladies. Our regular shirts are unisex shirts, and the V-necks are obviously a women's shirt. Discount codes. Since we're talking about squash, so last week I did a video about companion planting, and we talked about the different ways that you can improve your squash growing skills. And so I wanted to share with you a discount code. You can use discount code SQUASH20 right now through April 5th. If you're watching the replay and it's too late, I apologize. But that will save you 20% on all squash and pumpkin seeds. So let's see, put a piece of bacon and some brown sugar. Bacon makes everything better. Wild West Homestead, thank you very much. I appreciate it. So my sister created this for me. I created Mostly Feral Gardeners on Facebook. It's our little friends group, so our friends and subscribers and everything can share all their successes with Mary's Heirloom Seeds, which is kind of fun. And then, so we have Squash 20. That's going to give you 20% off squash seeds through April 5th. I had to write it down because I didn't want to mess it up. And you have Sunflower. So I have another discount code for you, and I just decided to add it today. It is Sunflower, and that will take 10% off of sunflower seeds now through April 30th. So, oh, awesome. Moonbladen says you bought the Veggie Basket shirt. Those shirts are shipping out now. So in the description section, I also included a link to our Veggie Basket shirt. That is another awesome favorite that my sister created for me. And then all the shirts are printed locally, which is awesome as well. Yay! And every order is going to include free seeds. That's just something I always do, and there's no code required for it. I am trying to see your comments. For some reason, YouTube is just messing with me, and they're not letting me see all your comments. So just to kind of sum it up, today's discussion was, besides having beautiful sun in my face today, today is growing squash for long-term storage. Now, last week I discussed pest control and crop rotation. So we're kind of sliding into the next one, and that is long-term storage for squash. I'm sharing with you a couple of varieties that are really, really good. So number one is Seminole squash. Number two is Tromboncino squash. Then you've got butternut squash and kabocha squash that can be stored for 6 months or more. Then you have buttercup and Hubbard squash that can be that can be stored for 4 to 5 months or even longer, again depending on your actual situation and how cool it is or how warm it is. And then you've got some of the other ones that are delicata, pink banana squash, acorn squash, spaghetti squash. I have another banana style squash as well. And I wanted to share something funny that happened. Maybe you can see it. Do you see that crack? I accidentally broke it. I dropped it on the ground and it broke, but it sealed itself. So I haven't actually opened this squash. So if you follow me on Facebook or if you follow me on YouTube, I'm going to cut this squash open and I'm going to see if there's any damage on the inside of the squash. I found it really interesting, and I wanted to say I have stored this squash since October 2023. It is now March 2024, and it has this big crack in it since November. And usually I would harvest this right away, but I noticed almost immediately that it healed itself on the inside. So I'm going to cut this open tonight, and I'm going to share pictures of it and let you know how it works. Jessica says, can I plant these seeds indoors? Is direct sow better? You can definitely plant seeds indoors. It is a little trickier because squash tends to be a little more difficult to transplant. They grow really fast. So I would not plant any more than, say, 4 weeks before your last frost date, just because they get really big. And unless you have a storage space for larger potted containers, and I will be totally honest with you, sometimes they don't transplant very well. So I'm fortunate to have a longer growing season, so I typically direct sow all of my squash. I'm looking around here and I've got squash in the front here, and I've got cucumbers back here, and I've got more squash over here. So it's warm enough, obviously, from the sun, that we have a good amount of sun and growing season here. So I don't necessarily grow squash indoors. But if you have a short growing season, definitely try it out. Worst case, they don't do as well. But in the beginning, there are ways to kind of save them if they get a little struggling. David says, I need to try acorn squash and banana squash growing them. Still planning my space out. Let's see. That's awesome that the squash lasted that long. I need to find some really hardy winter squash varieties that stay long over winter here in Montana. So the couple varieties that I mentioned, I also want to share this. I forgot. But it's been all the talk on social media, all the different social medias right now. And that is squash vine borer resistant. Both Seminole squash, Seminole pumpkin, and tromboncino squash are both squash vine borer resistant. That is not to say that they are the be all end all, will totally survive an attack, but they can be more resistant than others. And I have to say, if you struggle, please try it. I have had people say, I'll never plant squash again, and they try these varieties and they go, oh my gosh, I definitely have to do that. So just keep them in mind. We've never stored any because we tend to eat them fast. Haven't had much time to draw. Yeah, it's been super rainy. I know that very much. So, alrighty, everybody. So I think we covered everything. If you have additional questions, which I'm not a huge fan of hornets. I'll beat them with my squash. All right, if you've got any questions, please send an email to mary@marysheirloomseeds.com and I will try to answer your questions. In the description section, like I said, you'll find a link to my comprehensive planting guide. You'll find a link to the shirt I'm wearing, the shirt I wore last week, which is the 2 new shirts. You'll find so much information. I dare you to look through all the information I have and find out if there's information that I don't already have. If there's information I don't already have, send me an email and I will answer your question as soon as possible. My email is mary@marysheirloomseeds.com. Alrighty, everybody, I'm going to take my squash and go home. I'm Mary at Mary's Heirloom Seeds signing off. I really appreciate that you go live with me every week. If you've got questions, send me an email, comment on the video. I don't mind. Thanks for joining me and happy planting, everybody.